The wind swept across the barren Kansas plains, carrying with it the smell of dust and old sorrow. The wagon rattled over dry stones as Clara Reed sat in the back, her hands bound loosely with twine, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She wasn't a prisoner, not exactly, but she felt like one. Behind her, her uncle's voice barked orders at the driver, eager to be rid of her. "She's no use to anyone," he had told the trader in town. "Can't keep her home, can't bring us luck, just eats and breathes." They'd lost the farm last winter, and somehow Clara had become the debt. Her father was long dead, her mother buried under a cottonwood tree behind their cabin. With nowhere to go and no say in her fate, she was sold as labor to a rancher in the neighboring county. The trader called it a fair exchange. Clara called it the end of her world. By the time the wagon reached the Hollow Creek Ranch, the sun hung low and red, stretching long shadows across the golden fields. The air was thick with the scent of hay and horse sweat. She climbed down carefully, brushing the dust from her faded blue dress. A man stood near the corral, tall, broad-shouldered and silent as the land around him. His hat shaded most of his face, but his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were a deep grey that looked like storm clouds waiting to break. "You're the girl they sent?" he asked, voice steady. "Yes, sir," Clara whispered. "Clara Reed." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the house. "Name's Luke Hale. You'll be safe here." Safe. The word felt strange on her tongue. She followed him across the yard, her boots sinking into the soft dirt. The ranch house wasn't grand, but it was solid. Strong timbers, clean porch, a rocking chair that swayed gently in the wind. Inside, everything smelled of pine and smoke. Luke pointed to a small room near the kitchen. "You can stay here. I'll pay you fair for your work. No one's going to hurt you under my roof." Clara hesitated. "You don't have to keep me, sir." "I know I wasn't exactly bought as a worker." He turned, eyes narrowing slightly. "You were sold because some folks forgot what a person's worth really means. I didn't buy you. I'm giving you a place to start again." His words hit her harder than she expected. For years, she'd been treated like a burden, something to be carried, not cared for. Yet this man, who barely knew her name, spoke as though she still mattered. She managed a small nod, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would break. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara woke before sunrise, drawn by the smell of coffee and the sound of boots on the porch. Luke was already outside, mending a broken fence post. She stepped out quietly, the dew soaking her hem. "You don't sleep much?" he asked without looking up. "Not when my mind's full," she admitted. He smiled faintly. "Then work'll help with that. Grab those nails." They worked side by side in silence. The rhythm of hammer and wind steadied her heart. Each swing drove away a little more of her fear. When the sun rose high, Luke handed her a canteen. "You learn quick," he said. "I was taught to keep busy," she replied. "Idle hands make for unwanted company." He chuckled softly. "Who taught you that?" "My mother," she said, her eyes growing distant. She believed in hard work and kindness, even when kindness wasn't returned. Luke looked at her then, not as a man studying a worker, but as someone seeing another soul who carried too much pain. Sounds like she raised a strong daughter. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. She raised someone who keeps trying. Days turned into weeks. Clara found herself smiling again, though she tried to hide it. The ranch became her rhythm, the cluck of chickens, the creak of saddle leather, the low hum of Luke's voice when he talked to the horses. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words were careful, thoughtful, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. The townsfolk whispered, "Of course." They always did. "That's the girl he bought," they'd say when Clara walked into the store. "Poor thing. Doesn't know he'll tire of her soon." She kept her head high, remembering Luke's words. "You were never bought." One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. The sky turned violet and thunder shook the windows. Clara stood at the doorway, watching lightning dance over the hills. Luke came in, rain dripping from his hat. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands trembled. "Storms used to scare me. My father, he'd shout when the roof leaked." Said thunder was God reminding us we were small. Luke stepped closer, his voice gentle. Maybe it's his way of reminding us we're still alive. She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time without fear. There was something there she hadn't seen before. Warmth, steadiness, maybe even faith. That night, as rain beat softly on the roof, Clara lay awake in her small room listening to the wind. For the first time in years, she didn't feel unwanted. She didn't feel broken. She felt seen. And though she didn't yet know it, the rancher who had given her shelter would soon give her something far greater, a reason to believe in herself again. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and bright. The air was crisp with the scent of wet earth, and sunlight shimmered on puddles scattered across the yard. Clara stepped outside with her skirts gathered in one hand, her bare feet sinking into the cool mud. She closed her eyes and smiled faintly. For once, she wasn't afraid of the quiet. Luke was already out by the barn, rubbing down his chestnut stallion Marshall. He looked up as she approached, her hair loose from the night's rest. "Morning," he greeted. "Morning," she replied softly. "You sleep any?" "A little," she said. The storm sounded different this time, not frightening, almost comforting. He nodded, eyes on her instead of the horizon. "That's because you weren't alone in it anymore." She blinked, unsure how to answer that, and busied herself with the feed buckets. For days afterward, life on the ranch went on as if the thunder had cleansed more than just the land. The fields glowed greener, the air felt lighter, and even the cattle moved with lazy ease. But something else had changed. The space between Luke and Clara felt different now, charged with something neither of them could quite name. At night she found herself thinking about his voice, steady, low, always gentle, and how his eyes softened when he spoke her name. She'd never known a man could look at her like that, without judgment, without expectation. One afternoon, a wagon rolled up to the ranch, carrying the trader who had once delivered Clara. He was a thick man with yellowed teeth and greedy eyes. He climbed down and smirked. "Well now, Hale," he said to Luke. "Heard you're still keeping that woman. Figured you'd be wanting your money back by now." Luke's jaw tightened. "You're trespassing," the man laughed. "Ain't no harm done. I just came to collect what's mine, or what's left of her." He turned his eyes toward Clara, who froze where she stood by the fence. "She wasn't worth $1 then, and I doubt she's worth a dime now." Before she could react, Luke stepped forward, grabbing the man by the collar and shoving him back against the wagon. His voice was low but sharp as a whip. "You ever speak her name again with that mouth, and you won't have teeth to chew with." The trader's smile vanished. "She's damaged goods, Hale. Everyone knows it." Luke didn't let go. "She's mine now," he said. "And not the way a man claims property, but the way a heart claims its truth. And you'd best remember that before I run you off my land." The man stumbled away, muttering curses, and climbed back into his wagon. Clara stood trembling, her breath caught in her throat. She had never seen Luke angry before, not like that. But there was no cruelty in his rage, only protection. When the dust of the wagon faded, Luke turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her voice shook. "You shouldn't have done that. He'll spread talk." "Let him," Luke said simply. "You've been through worse talk, haven't you?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. She walked to him slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" Luke took off his hat and looked at her fully, sunlight cutting across his face. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and still keep breathing. Because you don't deserve to be treated like a mistake." The words broke something inside her. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stop the sob that rose in her chest. Luke reached out, gently touching her arm. "Hey, you're safe now." "You hear me?" She nodded, tears spilling freely. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said softly. "Just stay." That night, the stars came out brighter than she'd ever seen. Clara sat on the porch, watching the horizon fade into silver light. Luke joined her quietly, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in hand. They sat side by side in silence until she spoke. "When I came here, I thought I was broken," she said. "My family said I'd never have a life. Never bear children, never be worth a man's time." Luke turned to her, his gaze steady. "They lied." She smiled through her tears. "You make it sound so simple." "Sometimes the truth is simple," he said. "You're not broken, Clara. You're just someone who never got a fair chance." Weeks turned into months, and spring arrived like a blessing. The ranch flourished, wildflowers covering the fields like soft paint. Clara had found her rhythm, tending the animals, baking bread, laughing again. The townsfolk who once whispered behind her back now greeted her kindly, though none dared forget Luke's warning. Then one morning, Clara stood on the porch holding a trembling hand over her heart. She'd felt strange for days, dizzy, light-headed, different. When the town doctor confirmed what she already suspected, she sat in silence for a long while before whispering, "It's impossible." That evening, when Luke returned from the fields, she met him halfway. Tears glistened in her eyes as she placed his hand on her belly. "Luke," she said, her voice breaking, I'm going to have your child." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then he laughed, a deep, joyful sound that echoed across the valley. He lifted her into his arms and spun her gently, the setting sun painting them gold. "Guess those fools didn't know what they were talking about," he said, grinning. "You're stronger than they ever believed." Clara laughed through her tears. "Maybe God was just waiting for the right man to remind me." Luke pressed his forehead to hers. "And maybe he was waiting for the right woman to remind me what love really means." That night, as the stars shone above Hollow Creek, Clara lay beside the man who had given her back her life. For the first time, she didn't feel like someone sold or broken. She felt chosen, cherished, and finally free. If Clara and Luke's love story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Old West Legends for more powerful stories of courage, redemption, and true love that defied the odds.